Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 73 of Journey into Legends. Today we are going to be reading the first 10 books in the Jedi Apprentice series. Jedi Apprentice is a series of 18 books and 2 special editions written by Dave Wolverton and then Jude Watson that ran from 1999 to 2002. I'm so excited to get into this series. I've heard so many great things about these books, and I'm really excited to finally get some young Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon content. Anyways, without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so I just finished reading book 1, titled The Rising Force by Dave Wolverton, and I really enjoyed this book. Firstly, I really loved the character writing. Young Obi-Wan is so different than the character that we see in the films. He's got anger issues and isn't even skilled enough to be a Jedi Knight. And I found that characterization really refreshing, and I'm really intrigued to see how his character will evolve throughout the rest of the series. And I really enjoyed the dynamic between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Another really unconventional writing decision that I really enjoyed was Qui-Gon's reluctance to take Obi-Wan on as a Padawan. I also really liked the story told in this first book, especially after the freighter crash landed. All the action from that point onward was a lot of fun. Alright, so I just finished book 2 called The Dark Rival, which was when Jude Watson took over for the rest of the series, and I thought this book was really good. This book continues a few story elements from the last book, specifically with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan finally reaching the planet of Bandamere. And overall, the story in this one, as well as Bandamere as a setting, just wasn't as interesting as the last book. However, I did probably enjoy the whole book more for a few reasons. Firstly, Xanatos. Not only was he a great villain, but his inclusion did such a wonderful job of pushing along the development between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And that's the second thing I really loved about this book, their relationship, specifically Qui-Gon accepting Obi-Wan as his Padawan. Already, just 2 books into this series, I'm really enjoying these characters and their relationship. Anyways, let's move on to book 3. Alright, so I just finished reading book 3, titled The Hidden Past, and I really enjoyed this one. This one follows Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon on a mission to the planet Findar, a planet that is ruled with an iron fist by an organization called the Syndicate, that erases the memories of any rebels or criminals in a process called renewal. Overall, I wasn't a huge fan of this book until about the halfway point. The plot was just a bit lacking at first, with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon just helping the Dorita brothers steal some treasure. But the book did get a lot better when Obi-Wan was sent to Gala, which made for some good development between him and Qui-Gon, something that the book was sorely lacking at first. I also found the Dorita brothers, Guerra and Paxi, to be really entertaining characters as the book went on. Their dynamic with each other, with the Jedi, as well as the reveal that their sister was renewed and is the Syndicate's second-in-command, all that was great. But despite all that, I'd say this book is definitely the weakest thus far, just because the first 2 books focused much more on the development of our 2 main characters, as well as Xanatos as a villain, whereas this one was more of an isolated one-off adventure. Anyways, let's move on to book 4. Alright, so I just finished book 4, titled The Mark of the Crown, and this one is probably my least favorite so far. Now, there were some things I really did enjoy. I thought the plot was pretty entertaining. I enjoyed all of the political intrigue and how quickly allegiances shifted. There were also a lot of little plot twists that I enjoyed. Jono being the one that was poisoning the queen, the involvement of Xanatos, Elan being the true heir to the throne. But overall, this book just wasn't as interesting as the others. I thought Giba was a really underwhelming villain, and there just wasn't much character development for our main 2 characters, although I did really enjoy Qui-Gon's doubts about his legacy and what he would leave behind. That was a really interesting plotline. Anyways, let's move on to book 5. Alright, so I just finished book 5, titled The Defenders of the Dead. And this one is probably my favorite thus far. I absolutely loved Melita Dawn as a setting. The way the planet and the people are written really makes you feel how war-torn and hate-filled the Melita and the Dawn have become. And I really enjoyed how unfamiliar and ill-prepared Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan felt. But easily what makes this book the best one yet is the 2's character development, especially Obi-Wan's. After spending time with the young, a group of kids and teens who intend to free their planet from its cycle of war and death, Obi-Wan's commitment to the Jedi and his belief in the young's cause start to collide, and he's forced to make a choice. Stay and help the young save their planet, or complete this mission and return to Coruscant with Qui-Gon and Tal. And surprisingly, in what was such a fantastic scene, Obi-Wan stays behind, effectively abandoning the Jedi Order to stay on Melita Dawn. I really loved how this book ended on that cliffhanger, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Anyways, let's move on to Book 6. Alright, so I just finished Book 6, titled The Uncertain Path, and this one picks up where the last book left off, with Obi-Wan seemingly leaving the Jedi Order and remaining on Melita Dawn to ensure peace. And this one continues that storyline as the peace that the young managed to establish begins to crumble and the planet finds itself slipping back into war. And just when you thought the Melita Dawn storyline was starting to calm down, everything completely falls apart. Obi-Wan is pretty much exiled from the young, Sarasi, one of Obi-Wan's friends and a really great character, is killed, and the planet nearly becomes a war zone again. It's only when Qui-Gon comes to the rescue that him and Obi-Wan are able to regain control of the planet. Speaking of Qui-Gon, he and Tal also had their own storyline at the Jedi Temple as they start to investigate a series of thefts within the temple. Eventually they discover that the suspect is Bruk Chun, a former peer of Obi-Wan's. They also learn that Bruk is in league with an outsider who's familiar with the temple. I'm gonna guess that this outsider is probably Xanatos, since we haven't heard much from him in a while, and that possibility makes me excited for the next book. Anyways, let's move on to Book 7. Alright, so I just finished Book 7, titled The Captive Temple, and this one continues the Jedi Temple intruder plotline from the last book. And just like I predicted, the intruder that Bruk is working with is revealed to be none other than Xanatos. Overall, although this book was a bit weaker than the last few, I did still really enjoy it. I really enjoyed all the fallout from Obi-Wan's decision on Melita Dawn. I really like how he isn't just instantly accepted back into the Order and as Qui-Gon's Padawan. As for the temple plotline, I thought it could have been written a bit more intense, with more stakes, something along the lines of that one episode from the Clone Wars where Cad Bane infiltrates the temple, but I did really enjoy everything involving Xanatos and Bruk. All the duels were pretty good, although it's a shame Bruk got killed off so early. I think a lot more could have been done with his character. Anyways, let's move on to Book 8. Alright, so I just finished reading Book 8, which is called The Day of Reckoning, and unfortunately for being the finale to the Xanatos arc, this book was just extremely underwhelming. I didn't find the plot or the setting of Talos to be interesting or memorable, and I really wish that Catharsis, the betting event on Talos, was more prevalent in the story, like if Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan were captured and forced to compete in the death matches. I did really enjoy the characters of Den and Andra, though, as well as the scene where Qui-Gon unofficially accepts Obi-Wan back as his Padawan. But my biggest issue with this book was Xanatos' death. The final confrontation between him, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan didn't feel nearly as climactic as it should have, and him just jumping into a pool of acid felt so cheap and sudden. Overall, on its own, this book wasn't bad or anything, but as the big finale to this arc, in my opinion, it didn't deliver. Alright, so I just finished Book 9, titled The Fight for Truth, and in this one, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Adigalia, and Siritachi travel to the isolated planet Keegan to investigate a potentially Force-sensitive child. And overall, I really enjoyed this book. From the get-go, the planet of Keegan gave off a really eerie vibe. The book did a good job of establishing a sense of underlying darkness behind the Keegan society. Another really interesting aspect of this book was the different visions and premonitions the guides of Keegan get. First, they describe things such as a weapon powerful enough to destroy a planet, as well as an army with terrifying masks, all alluding to, of course, the Empire. Those references were a bit on the nose for me and felt a bit forced, but there was one vision that Qui-Gon actually has at the end of this book that gave me goosebumps. He and Obi-Wan are in the cockpit leaving Keegan when they get briefly blinded by the Keegan sun. And as Qui-Gon is looking at Obi-Wan, he no longer sees Obi-Wan's young, boyish features, and instead sees an older man living alone with nothing but his dark memories, obviously a reference to Obi-Wan later in life. and for some reason, I just absolutely loved that scene, and it gave me goosebumps. Now, my only complaint with this book was that the school Obi-Wan and Ciri are sent to felt a bit too similar to some other plotlines from the EU, such as the Hethreer plotline from the Crystal Star and the Shadow Academy plotline from Young Jedi Knights, and for that reason, the second half of this book was definitely weaker than the first in my opinion. However, I did overall enjoy the book. Anyways, let's move on to Book 10. Alright, so I just finished reading Book 10, titled The Shattered Peace, and unfortunately this one felt really inconsequential, and overall it wasn't even that fun of an adventure. In this one, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon visit the planets Rutan and Senali, two planets with a peculiar diplomatic tradition. To promote peace between the two worlds, they trade their royal heirs. However, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are sent to negotiate when one of the heirs refuses to return to his home world when the time comes. And throughout the rest of the book, the Jedi are desperately trying to convince the prince to return to his home planet in order to prevent another war from breaking out. Overall, I found this concept really intriguing and unique, but the book never did anything interesting with this concept. Instead, Jude Watson opted for an anticlimactic plot twist and a strange conclusion. And for me, the strangest part of this book was the theme. The whole book poses the question of what's more important, one's duty or their personal feelings. And the way Watson wrote it, she not only refuses to take a stance in the end, but she strangely switches her stance on a whim. Sometimes, posing a question is more thought-provoking than sending a message. But when the question is so vague and so dependent on context, it sort of falls flat. But overall, this book just wasn't very fun. The characters were forgettable, the action was bland, the character development was minimal, and the locations, except for Senali, were unremarkable. Not the worst book, but definitely not the best in the series. So overall, these first 10 books definitely varied in quality, however I am really enjoying this series thus far. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's development is extremely well done, and so is the progression of their relationship. And although the conclusion to his arc felt a bit rushed and cheap, Xanatos was a really fun villain and an interesting foil to both Jedi. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be continuing the Jedi Apprentice series with the last 8 books, as well as the 2 special editions. See ya.